In this video, we're going to talk about the concept of manifest destiny and how during the mid-19th century, so the mid-1800s, Americans moved out west in large numbers to settle what they called the Wild West, to claim what they believed were unclaimed territories. But in fact, there were actually many Native American civilizations out there. So Americans believed that they had a mission to fulfill in the mid-19th century. They had this dream to expand the country, and as early as Thomas Jefferson, when he purchases the Louisiana Territory in 1803, he believes that the United States should be what he calls an empire of liberty. And he really did have this dream that eventually the entire Louisiana Purchase and some would be populated by farmers, by the average American farmer, just that true person-based democracy that he had always dreamed of in the United States. So exploring the new territory after Louisiana Purchase became very important to him, and that's how we got Lewis and Clark, who we talked about in Chapter 6. But the question was there something bigger leading us? Was there some sort of higher power or destiny that we were fulfilling by moving out west? And that concept is called manifest destiny. It's the idea that there's a destiny that the U.S. should expand to the Pacific Ocean, that it's just inevitable, it's what's supposed to happen, it's the right thing to do, that God wants us to grow this empire from sea to shining sea. It's a God-given right. This term was first termed around 1845 about the annexation of Texas, but the concept of spreading our way all the way to the Pacific Ocean, as we just talked about, was not a new idea, and this had always been a goal of many Americans from the beginning of this country. So here is a painting that kind of exemplifies the concept of manifest destiny, and we can see many different wagons and stagecoaches and miners and workers and farmers and trains. Everybody's moving out in what would look like a westward direction, and we have this angel, this being from the heavens, guiding the way to the western lands. And that, in essence, is the concept of manifest destiny. So what are some reasons that people would move west? Well, mostly for money. There's a great fur trade up along the Mississippi River. There are rumors of gold as you get out to California and the Pacific coast. Plenty of land for farming. It was very hard to buy farming land in the original colonies, the states that were original colonies. The land was kind of already spoken for and claimed, so there was lots of opportunity to go get your own farmland out west, and the work opportunities that came with all of that. How about religion? There were religions such as the Mormons who were persecuted and had a hard time practicing the religion the way they wanted to, and this also goes for various branches of Protestantism. So the Western Territory became a place where you could move out to and practice your religion with people leaving you alone, allowing you to do that. Adventure. There's a lot of unknown out there. This land was not very well known to most Americans, so there was this excitement that you could have a Western adventure, that you could start over a life that you weren't happy about in the eastern half of the continent. And trade. We were not the first to get out there. There were many Native American civilizations. The Spanish had been out there for hundreds of years, and Canadians were trapping furs and so on. There's also an Asian presence on the West Coast. There are many people and civilizations already out there to trade with, and there was an economic motivation for going out to trade. So let's talk about the presence of Native Americans during westward expansion. Expansion conflicted with Native American tribes. They had this land for a long time. And just like we saw with the civilized tribes and with the conflicts with Andrew Jackson in Chapter 7, some assimilate, others resist. So we have the same issues, the same problems, and the same debates that we had with Native Americans on the east of the Mississippi. We're having those troubles and difficulties with the Native American civilizations west of the Mississippi River. Specifically, and this is actually on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, we run into the conflict of the Black Hawk War in the 1830s, which is in western Illinois, and the Native American Black Hawk tribes rebel against the U.S. Army, and the Illinois militia has to put down this rebellion. And through this process, 200 Sauk Indians are slaughtered by the Illinois militia. Interestingly enough, Abraham Lincoln, a very young Abraham Lincoln, serves in the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War, but as he put it, he basically, the only thing he ever killed was a mosquito. So he did not see very much action during the Black Hawk War. And then there's this middle ground. There is some territory that wasn't settled by either Native Americans or uh, white Americans, and there was actually some cooperation amongst Western tribes and settlers for trade and guidance. Then we have the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1851, and what this does is this allows Native American tribes to control the Central Plains, and it gives payments to the tribes in return. Basically, if you leave our settlers alone and let them pass through your territory, we will give you money for not causing a problem. The problem on the other side of the treaty, though, is that as more and more settlers move out west, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to eventually encroach on that land. So this really just buys the settlers time to move out there with minimal problems from Native American tribes attacking them. Not all Native American tribes in the West agree to this treaty, but it is a major deal that gives the opportunity for more people to travel west. So again, in return, tribes won't attack settlers and allow the building of roads and eventually railroads through that territory. And settlers still come in large numbers and upset the Native Americans. The Treaty of Fort Laramie really doesn't solve any problems. It just pushes off the issue of what to do with that Native American land. So let's talk about the major western trails that people followed to get out west. Probably the most famous one is the Oregon Trail. It started in Independence, Missouri, and it went out to Oregon Territory, which is modern-day Oregon, Washington, and Vancouver in Canada. There's also the Mormon Trail, which moved from Illinois to Missouri, and then from Missouri out to Utah Territory. And then the Santa Fe Trail, which left also from Independence, Missouri, and it moved southwest to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So here's a map that shows kind of the major trails out west during this time period. All of them start in the Missouri-Illinois area. The blue here is the Lewis and Clark expedition from 1804 to 1806. They split up coming back through Montana, or what will become Montana, and that was the original exploration after the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. We see the Santa Fe Trail goes southwest from Independence, Missouri, and arrives in modern-day Santa Fe, New Mexico. We see that the Mormon Trail follows due west through modern-day Utah and Nevada, and eventually settled in California, which is why there's such a significant population of Mormons in Utah and Nevada today. And then the Oregon Trail follows a very similar route, but then goes northwest to the Oregon Territory, which again is modern-day Oregon and Washington State. So on the Santa Fe Trail, it was 780 miles, and wagons traveled alone at first, but then they had to start traveling together to protect each other from Native American attacks. As you can see, Laramie is in modern-day Wyoming on that map, so this is pretty far removed from the tribes that would sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie. And it took a lot of teamwork. They traded materials with each other so everyone could make it. It really was a rough passage on all of these trails, and it was very minimalist. You didn't have a lot of comforts. There weren't a lot of stops along the way. So it took a lot of cooperation and trading amongst wagon parties to get out there and get settled. And it establishes the first American presence in New Mexico and Arizona, which we'll talk more about when we talk about Texas and the Mexican-American War. The Mormon Trail. Joseph Smith was the founder of the Mormon faith. It originated in upstate New York, and then he took his followers to Illinois. After being in Illinois, they moved to Missouri, and they found that they were persecuted along the way because Mormonism was not seen as kind of a next step in Christianity, but rather kind of more of a cult, something that is very different from Christian views. So this causes a lot of tension between very religious Americans at this time during the Second Great Awakening, and the Mormons have a very hard time finding a place where they are accepted for their religious beliefs. Joseph Smith is eventually murdered by an angry mob in Missouri, and Brigham Young is the man who takes over, leading the Mormons to a place where they can practice their religion, and Brigham Young leads the Mormons out to the Utah Territory. So if you've heard of BYU, Brigham Young University in Utah, it is named after Brigham Young, and it is in Utah because that is where the Mormons settled. And the reason that the Mormons were able to settle in a place like Salt Lake City, where there are very few natural resources and there's not a lot of fresh water and there's not a lot of lumber, is because even though each Mormon got their own plot of land, all of the resources, the lumber, the water, all the natural resources were owned by everybody in the settlement group. And that sharing of resources allowed for the resources to be used in a way that everybody was able to survive, and eventually their settlement survives and thrives out in Utah Territory. So here are some settlers on the trail. And then the Oregon Trail, our most famous trail, traced some of Lewis and Clark's path. Uh, and people went out to Oregon because there was a promise of fertile farming soil and land in Oregon Territory and lots of furs to be trapped. By 1844, 5,000 American settlers arrived in Oregon, which is a lot of people. And then before you know it, you have thousands on the trail every year. This is a very, very treacherous trail, though. Lots of natural conditions that are adverse, risk of Native American attacks. If you leave at the wrong time of year, you will be buried in snows in the Rocky Mountains, and you'll never make it through the Rockies. The Rockies were hard to navigate in a wagon without the snow. So it's very treacherous, very dangerous, risky trip. But the reward of fertile land and a fresh start was absolutely something that was worth it to a lot of these settlers. Many of them don't make the trip, but those who make it out there see this as a worthwhile risk. And this all ties into the election of 1844 for president, because James K. Polk, who's a Democrat, he calls for the annexation of the entire Oregon Territory. He's a big fan of Manifest Destiny. He wants America to be as big as it possibly can. The problem is that we are sharing Oregon Territory at this time with Great Britain. That was a deal that had been cut at the end of the War of 1812. So his campaign slogan when he runs for president is 54-40 or fight, which is the line of latitude that he believed that the American part of Oregon Territory should extend all the way north to, which would be in modern-day Canada. It's more than we have today. Eventually, Polk gets elected, and he does settle for the 49th parallel, the 49th degree of latitude, in 1851, the modern-day northern border of the Pacific Northwest. But this is what allows James Polk to become very popular amongst Americans, and the fact that he is overwhelmingly elected president and re-elected, for that matter, shows that Americans were very much focused on expanding the borders of this country and settling all of that western land through this concept of manifest destiny.